Welcome to Quick MCAT Lessons, where I try to explain MCAT topics in 10 minutes or less. Today, we'll talk about visual cues and Gestalt principles. Since we have two eyes, we can have binocular and monocular cues. Of the visual cues, which are depth, form, motion, and constancy, only depth is a binocular cue, where the others are monocular. So binocular cues rely on input from both eyes. The main one is retinal disparity. Each eye sees a slightly different image because the eyes are around 2 inches apart. The brain then merges these images together to perceive depth. The closer the object, the greater the disparity. Another binocular cue is convergence. When you look at something close, your eyes turn inward. The brain can then sense this angle and gauge distance. If you just take 5 seconds and you just look at your nose with both eyes, after a few seconds, you'll start to feel a strain. Why is this? This is because looking at things far away, your eye muscles are relaxed, but if you look at things nearby, they contract. Moving on to monocular views. Monocular views can be perceived with just one eye, and they include form, motion, and constancy. So starting with form. In form, you have a few things. You have relative size, interposition, and relative height. Relative size is that you can tell the size of an object. Even if one eye is closed, you can still tell its relative size. You can tell if it's closer, it seems bigger. If it's farther, it seems smaller. Interposition, which is overlap, is objects in the front block those behind. If you have one eye closed, you can see if something is in front, if something is behind. And finally, relative height. Things higher in the visual field are perceived to be further than those that are lower. Also, there's one more thing in form. There's shading and contour. So light and shadows actually help us perceive form like depth and contours, or craters and mountains. Moving on to motion, monocular cues also give a sense of motion. So motion parallax, also known as relative motion, is that things farther away move slower. And so if you are standing on a bridge and you're looking at cars that are super far away, they don't look like they're moving at all. But cars right by you, they're zooming past you, and this is motion parallax. So let's move on to the monocular cue of constancy. This describes our brain's ability to maintain perception even when sensory information changes. So a door will always be a door even if we look at it from the side where it might have some other angle or a trapezoid angle. We know it's still a door and it still looks like a door to us. There's also size constancy, where we know an object is the same size even if it looks smaller at a distance. So if we're standing on that bridge again and we see the cars, we know how small they look when we're looking at it in front of the bridge, but we know that they're not tiny, and this is size constancy. Color constancy is that we perceive colors as the same under different lighting conditions. So if you're sitting in your room and you're looking at your wall, it might be a beige color, and if you turn off the light or you dim the lights, it will look as a different color, but you know it's that same beige color, and this is that constancy. Finally, shape constancy. So a door is still a rectangle even if it looks like a trapezoid when you're opening it. These are all top-down processes that help us make sense of the world consistently. Now, Gestalt principles. These principles explain how we organize visual elements into groups or unified wholes. They're used everywhere. So imagine you're watching a basketball game on TV. How do we influence ourselves to believe that this fluid, realistic representation of the game is anything more than just pictures or frames joined together? This is Gestalt principles. A lot of these principles, it would be so much easier if you Googled Gestalt principles and saw an image for each one, because they're kind of hard to explain, but if you look at an image, it's just super easy to understand. But I will try nonetheless. So starting off with similarity. We group similar looking objects. So imagine you have 5 circles, one after another, and then you have and then you have 5 squares beside each one. So if you look at a picture, you're going to describe it as a row of circles and a row of squares. We didn't tell you that these circles are grouped and these squares are grouped, but you just grouped them by the principle of similarity. There's also a principle of proximity. So objects close together are seen as part of the same group. Now imagine you have 2 rows of circles, but one row has less space in between each one, and one row has more space in between each one. Instead of grouping all of them as just a bunch of circles, you're going to say 2 groups of circles, or 2 separate groups. Then you have continuity. This is how we perceive smooth, continuous patterns. This one's really hard to explain audibly, but it means that lines follow the smoothest path. So imagine there's a bunch of dots. Our brain will draw a line on the dots that seem like the smoothest path, even though these dots aren't significant in any way. We also have the principle of closure, where we fill in missing parts to complete figures. So imagine you only have 4 corners of a square drawn. If you show this image to somebody, they will be able to group them as part of a single complete figure, and they will know it's a square. And finally, we have symmetry. Symmetry is we perceive objects being symmetrical and forming around a center point. Imagine you see a symmetrical object. You will assume that it forms from the center. It does not make sense that the start point would be somewhere in the corner or somewhere off center. And there are also some laws that are related to this. So the law of common fate. This says that if there's an array of dots, and half the dots are moving upwards and half the dots are moving downwards, we would group the upward moving and downward moving dots as 2 separate units. And so that's the law of common fate. There's also the law of past experiences. So imagine you see an English word that you've never seen before. The word has the letters L-I right next to each other. The law of past experiences will say that these are 2 separate letters. We would not use the principle of closure here to interpret this as the uppercase U. This is because some visual stimuli is categorized according to past experience. And finally, we have the law of pragnans. This says that reality organized is reduced to the simplest form possible. So, take for example the Olympic rings. The brain thinks of this as 5 circles, not some other complex shape. So it's pretty much the simplest form possible. And these principles also demonstrate top-down processing. Our brain fills in or interprets based on expectations. In summary, we use binocular and monocular cues to perceive depth, form, motion, and constancy. Constancy allows us to maintain stable perception even as sensory input changes. Depth is a binocular cue. And form, motion, and constancy are monocular cues. Gestalt principles help us organize visual input into meaningful patterns. That's it for today. In the next episode, we'll start with the visual system.